The Parsha this week is Parashat Emor. Parashat Emor contains many ideas, but there's a particular chapter that I want to focus on. In that chapter, it speaks about the holidays. Now, those of us who pay attention will know that the holidays are mentioned in different parts of the Torah. There are sections in Sefer Bamidbar, Parshas Pinchas, that speaks about the holidays. There are sections in Dvarim and Parashat Re'eh that speak about the holidays. But over here in Vayikra, aside from the various mentions that took place in Shemot as well, we find in Emor a list of the holidays. And the question really that we need to ask ourselves, which I'm not going to answer, is what are the different collections of the holidays? So those of you who want to work on this question, you need to look which holidays are mentioned and which aren't mentioned. What's the sequence? What's the list? Where does it begin? Where does it end? What's included? What's excluded? Over here in Parashat Emor, when we look at the holidays, we'll come very quickly to an understanding that there is something which links them all, and that is the agricultural aspect. Which means we know that our Jewish holidays have theological or perhaps historical background, but they also have an agricultural background. For the farmer, which many in ancient Israel were, this was incredibly important, which means there was a way to fuse together the lives which they lived, which were agricultural for the most part, and their history and their theology. So springtime is a time that we're in now. Springtime is a time that things come back to life, things start to grow. Springtime is when the Jewish people came back to life. Springtime is when the Jews rose up like a phoenix of old and became a living nation. Who would have thought that a nation that was exiled not once but twice could come back to life the way that it has in the 20th century? If you were betting people, I'm sure the odds you could have gotten in Vegas would have been insurmountable odds. It was impossible. No nation ever came back once to its land, and here's a nation that came back twice. And this agricultural part, this identity in terms of the land itself, really is an important element. When the Jews came back in the 20th century, the land came back to life. Just as was, I don't want to use the word predicted, but described in the Talmud. It said that when the people come back, the land will know it. It's almost like a mother and a child. If we look towards the very end of the book of Vayikra, we'll understand why there's this emphasis now on the holidays in terms of agriculture. Next week, we're going to move to Bahar B'chukotai, which speaks again of the land in terms of the laws of Shemitah and Yovel, sabbatical year, but then moving towards B'chukotai with a terrible curse. If we don't deserve to live in the land will not allow us to be there. That this is a holy land, and therefore there are conditions. But I want to move back to Parashat Emor. You know, if I were to ask the average observant Jew, why is it that we count the days between Pesach and Shavuot, Passover, and the holiday of Pentecost, I guess you can call it, counting 7 weeks? So I think most people would say that we count the time between leaving Egypt and arriving at Mount Sinai, which is a very nice answer, and I want to be a little careful, may even be true on a certain level. But you noticed I said on a certain level. You look in Parashat Emor, it tells you exactly what it is. It says nothing about leaving Egypt. Actually, it says the opposite. When you arrive in the land of Israel, ki tavo el haaretz, when you arrive in the land of Israel, then you are going to have something called the Omer, and this is again all agricultural. It's going to be the first things which grow, and you're going to bring an offering, and you count the days to the holiday of Shavuot, where the Torah, at least over here, and actually in no place, tells us or reveals to us that happens to be the day of the giving of the Torah, Mount Sinai. If you do the math, it's fairly simple that it has to be around that day. But it's interesting. The Omer and the holiday of Shavuot, which is linked with Pesach, are all on its agricultural identity. Yes, there have been some early commentators who have suggested that if we were asked to do this when we enter the land of Israel, then either we can say perhaps, or maybe stronger than perhaps, the Jews must have done the same thing when they left Egypt as they were making their way towards Mount Sinai. But again, that's not the true identity. The true identity is something which is the land of Israel based, and the Omer is something agricultural, which was meaningful for the farmers who lived in the land. But I think this can really help us understand a dual aspect of what leaving Egypt was all about. When Moshe was by the burning bush, God tells him, I've heard the pain, I've heard the suffering, I've heard the cries, and I'm going to keep the vow that I made to the ancestors, to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and I'm going to bring them out. I'm going to bring to the land that flows with milk and honey. In fact, that's the first time that description is used. The land that flows with milk and honey. Eretz zavat chalav u'dvash. And then there's a little bit more of a dialogue, and we know that Moshe questions the propriety of him being the one who was chosen to take the Jews out, and he questions God on this. Will they really listen to me, and so on? And God says, I'll give you a sign. That when you take them out, you're going to come and serve God on this mountain. And you have to stop right there and maybe pay attention to geography. If the Jews were supposed to leave Egypt and go to the land of Israel, there was a shorter way to go. Actually, the way that we're told in Parashat Beshalach that they didn't go. You go up the coast, and you could be in Israel fairly quickly. Instead, Moshe took them towards the desert, which, if you think about it, in the desert there's less supplies, unless, of course, that's particularly what the idea is. You know, it's interesting that what did they eat in the desert? We know they had man which fell from heaven, bread from God. It's interesting because the earlier usage of the word Omer is in the context of the man which fell. That was the amount of man that fell. Which means that maybe this time between leaving Egypt and going to Sinai, where there is an Omer and a different kind of Omer, bread from heaven, maybe that was quite meaningful in terms of the Omer which was brought in the offering on the day after Passover. But think about the two destinations. In a certain sense, you can say they're contradictory. One is the land of Israel, the other is Mount Sinai. Now, all of us know that Mount Sinai was ultimately not the final destination. It was a place that we were going to stop on the way and serve God. And we all understand that Jewish history would be quite different if we never made that stop. If we never received the Ten Commandments. If we never received the Torah. I mean, what kind of life would we have had? And I'll use a term for lack of a better term. If we would have gone straight to the land of Israel, perhaps we would have been secular Zionists. Maybe very decent secular Zionists, because we would have had wonderful ancestors, wonderful grandparents, great-grandparents, like Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. We would have had wonderful ancestors who would have taught us decency and values, but it still wouldn't have been the same. Which means the belief of religious Zionism actually encapsulates those two destinations. And we never forget about either of those destinations. One destination when we leave Egypt is to make an important stop at Sinai. That's a destination even if it's temporary, because what we receive at Sinai will be permanent. On the other hand, the other destination for the Jewish people always is the land of Israel. And even when we're not there yet, we face it at least 3 times a day and we pray. And maybe another couple times we face it and we think, and we contemplate, and we wish and we dream. But those are our 2 destinations. Standing at the burning bush, we learn about those 2 destinations. The holiday of Shavuot actually has both of these elements. The holiday of Shavuot, on the one hand, represents standing at Sinai, receiving the Torah, serving God at Sinai. On the other hand, the holiday of Shavuot, as we saw, is this holiday of Bikurim, is this agricultural holiday. Ki tavo la'aretz, we'll learn in Sefer Devarim. When you come to land, you're going to take the first fruits. That's connected to the holiday of Shavuot. I know many people are fond of saying the holiday of Shavuot has nothing to do. It's not like Sukkot, it's not like Pesach. The Bikurim, the first fruits, are connected to the holiday of Shavuot. Which means the holiday of Shavuot really represents those 2 destinations that we learned about by the burning bush, Sinai and the land of Israel. And we can't separate them. We're allowed to live a life with dual aspirations, with dual responsibilities. That's the complexity of our people. We are a people who are like other peoples in a certain sense, that there's land which is ours. We're unlike other people because we lost it so long ago and we never forgot it. But we're a people unlike other people because of our belief, because of that Torah which is within our hearts. To be a religious Zionist means I remember the 2 different responsibilities which Moshe learns about by that burning bush. The holiday of Shavuot represents both. And now we realize this week's Parsha in Emor, when it speaks about the holidays in terms of the agriculture, in terms of the counting the days between Pesach and Shavuot, we count the Omer because the Omer is about this identity of being in the land and being farmers, but again, not farmers like every other farmer. religious farmers, farmers who have great belief, farmers who plant something in the ground and realize that God is their senior partner, and as they watch things come back to life, they learn about the very idea of Tchiyat HaMetim. It's interesting, in Israel, we stop saying Marashiv Eruch Morid HaGeshem in Pesach, but we say something else, Morid HaTal. Tal means dew, literally. Almost every time the Talmud or Midrashic literature speaks about resurrection, Tchiyat HaMetim, it always uses the phrase or the word Tal, concept of Tal, dew. It says even at Mount Sinai it was so intense that people just couldn't breathe anymore and they passed out and as if they died. And it says that God sprinkled Tal on them and they came back to life. In the springtime we start to think about Tal. We look around, we look out the window, and we see things are growing. We see things that have come back to life that look like they were dead. And on Pesach, every year, we had belief that the Jewish people who came back to life will once again. How fortunate are we to live in a time where once again the Jewish people came back to life, merged together with their soulmate, the land of Israel. They were able to come back, become farmers again. And I know that Israel has moved towards high tech, but at the same time we moved towards high tech, we started making some really, really good wine. So as we get closer to the holiday Shavuot, think about the Bikurim, learn the Mishnayot of Bikurim, buy a wonderful bottle of Israeli wine, and say L'chaim, because we're a people that really truly came back to life.